Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are continuing to talk about fantasy football teams and their projections for the 2021 season. I'm going alphabetically through every single team, and today we will go to the Las Vegas Raiders. So if you want to see any team listed alphabetically before Las Vegas, please check out my channel and you will see a preview of that team. I'm going through every single team, and then I'm going to talk about how they will set you up for success in fantasy football and go through some more specific strategies as we get closer to the draft. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, please check out my channel. Also, if you can guess the name of the song that I started out with and guess it correctly, especially, then I will answer one of your fantasy football questions on the channel. This band is from Las Vegas, so hopefully you can hopefully that's a hint for you. But I also do a lot of other stuff on my channel. I make song covers. I like doing 90s and 70s songs. That's a lot of what I do. And I also react to songs as well. I also want to talk about some more NBA as we get closer to the off season as well. So there's a lot of stuff that I do on this channel. So if you're interested in the wide variety of content, please check it out. So yeah, we'll go to the Las Vegas Raiders, and we'll start with their schedule as I do with every team. And for Las Vegas in particular, the key points I want to make is that the beginning of their schedule is very rough. They got a lot of good defenses at the beginning of the season, but they do have potential mid-season with a better stretch of the season against weaker defenses. So this is very much buy low candidates after the first few weeks, and they have potential to do very well in the middle of the season. So I'm looking at guys like Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller, things like that. And we'll get into all those players as the video progresses. But their schedule the first few weeks, they've got Baltimore, a very good defense, Pittsburgh on the road, another great defense, Miami, which is an improved defense and was very good last year, Chargers project to be a better defense with Joey Bosa back, and the Bears in week 5. So that's a very difficult first 5 games of the season. That's the most difficult stretch for the first 5 games that I've seen so far. So expect potential buy low on these guys. But then things get better after their bye week in week 8. First of all, before week 8 and week 7, they got the Eagles. I don't think that's a great defense. But then week 9 through 12, they've got the New York Giants, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Dallas Cowboys. You can make cases for some of those defenses to be better, but in reality, I think those are all great matchups for Las Vegas, and it's a potential for some of these guys to really improve significantly from their numbers of prior, that like the way the season is projected to start for them. So keep that in mind. Their playoffs are not exactly the best, though. They've got the Cleveland Browns, that projects to improve defense. They got Denver. I don't think Denver is as good a defense as they've been in the past, but they're still kind of got that identity as a good defense. It's also a late season game too. And then in week 17, they've got the Indianapolis Colts on the road. Colts are, I mean, that's an indoor game, but still the Colts are projected to be a pretty good defense. So it's not exactly the ideal playoff schedule for you. But they do have a good stretch from week 9 to 12 that I think would be good to take advantage of this team. Get into their offensive players now, and their quarterback is Carr. So Carr, he's pretty much known around the league as a guy that is not really like his job is in jeopardy or anything like that, but he's kind of, everybody kind of knows that he's not really an elite quarterback. He's just more that middle tier guy that's just going to kind of be a stopgap for you. If you're looking for a franchise quarterback for a team like the Raiders, they're performing in the middle. They don't really have any other options, so that's what they're rolling with. And he's not a bad quarterback. He was the number 14 quarterback in fantasy football last year, so right around the level of fringe starter to waiver wire guy. So to me, Carr is somebody that is going to fall into that category of a guy who, if you're streaming, he's a decent option depending on game to game, but he's not really a guy I'm looking to draft. And especially with the way they're starting that season against Baltimore and Pittsburgh, I'm especially not looking to draft him. But he's got some good matchups later in the season, especially with the stretch where they have a great schedules during bye weeks. So he's a guy that you could potentially pick up when your starting quarterback is on a bye, like a Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, etc. Pick them up and then put Derek Carr in. It could give you some solid value for that week that they're out. So he's a guy to potentially look out for there. For instance, you look at, like we just talked about Patrick Mahomes. So he's out. His bye week is week 12, and the Raiders are playing the Cowboys in week 12, which is a terrible defense last year. So this is an example of a guy that you can definitely pick up if Patrick Mahomes is on a bye week. Or for Patrick Mahomes' bye week, you can look at Derek Carr. But again, not really looking to draft him, but he's a guy that I could definitely keep my eye on as a stream quarterback. Other quarterbacks they have, Marcus Mariota as their backup. He's had some good seasons in the past, but he's a backup pretty much. And I like if he's got a little more rushing ability. So if he for some reason has to start some games, he could potentially give you that. But again, he's not a guy that I'm really too excited about if Carr gets injured. So we move to running backs, and this is a little more interesting because one of their better fantasy performers last year was Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, he was the number 8 running back in PPR and standard, so RB1 level player. He performed well, had some excellent games, but he's a guy that I'm cautious about because of the level of up and down that he had from game to game. So we look at his stats from last year for Josh Jacobs, and he had some excellent games, but he also had some very poor games. So week 1 last year against the Carolina Panthers, 25 carries, 93 yards, 3 touchdowns. Great. Next week, he had 27 carries for 88 yards, no touchdowns. So that's a significant drop-off. He had 3 catches in that game, though. But then he's had some other games where he's really performed poorly, and especially against Tampa Bay, he had only 10 carries for 17 yards. That is not very good at all. He had 3 catches in that game. And then against the Atlanta Falcons, he only had 7 carries and 3 catches. And he also fumbled in that game too. So he's a guy that was very up and down last year. He's also not really the best PPR player, so he can't really cover you in the event of he's generally catching like 3 catches a game, not anything like too much more than that. So you really are depending on touchdowns with Josh Jacobs. And to me, I generally try to avoid that with running backs because I want to make sure that if I'm drafting a guy that's going to go as high as Josh Jacobs and maybe that second to first to anywhere, but I can see him going anywhere between first to third round. You want to make sure you have consistency in guys that you can rely upon. And Josh Jacobs is a guy who's up and down. I can see a lot of situations where the Raiders are their games scripted out of some of these games, and they have to play from behind to catch up, and they don't really use Josh Jacobs to throw the ball to. So all that said, I'm not super high on him. He is somebody that if he slips, I would be interested in potentially, but he's not really a running back that I'm super excited about taking on my team. And the other thing that complicates it is that they just signed Kenyan Drake. So Kenyan Drake came from the Arizona Cardinals. He had an excellent 2019, and I thought was really going to have a breakout year in 2020, but that really didn't happen for him. And now he's on the Raiders. So I don't really see him eating too much into Josh Jacobs' carries, but Kenyan Drake is a talented player, and he's an especially good goal line back. So this is a potential where some of Josh Jacobs' goal line touchdowns get taken away by Kenyan Drake, and Josh Jacobs, you need to rely on him for touchdowns, as I talked about earlier. So it's just not a great situation for me. I think as a team it helps them because it gives them multiple looks at running backs to keep them fresh, because I think they're going to generally be more of a rush team if they can. But for fantasy, it's not really good for Josh Jacobs' value, and I don't really see Kenyan Drake necessarily stepping up either. The only reason I would consider taking Drake is as a handcuff, because he definitely presents one of the best opportunities. Josh Jacobs had over 270 carries last year, So he's going to get a huge workload volume. The question is can either of these guys be efficient if one of them were to get injured, then you have to go with one or the other. Other players they have, Jalen Richard, I'm not interested in at all. He's been there for a while. He's generally done absolutely nothing. So not really interested in him. And then Theo Riddick is mildly interesting to me in a PPR setting and if you have injuries because he's one of the PPR running back machines but he's definitely past his prime, and I think this is probably going to be one of his last seasons in the league. So I only am looking at Theo Riddick in games where they have running back injuries and they're playing the Chiefs and probably going to end up throwing to the running back a lot. That's the only interest I would have in a guy like that. So wide receivers. So there's a lot of different takes that people have about this wide receiver core because of a lot of these players are generally younger guys that are unproven and still developing their reputation of what they are in the league. So the number one receiver listed on their depth chart is Henry Ruggs III. And he is another one of those receivers that, like a Deshaun Jackson, where he's going to have some excellent games and he's going to have some very poor games. So we look at Henry Ruggs from last season. He's a guy that's obviously got a lot of potential coming from Alabama as number 12 overall pick in the draft in 2020. So he's got potential to step up, but he really needs to develop more consistency. And we look from game to game, and it kind of shows this. So against Kansas City, a good offense where they're going to have to throw the ball a lot to stay in the game. He had 2 catches for 118 yards and touchdowns. So he gave you a good stat line, but he also only had 2 catches in that game on 3 targets. He gives you some good games, like against the Jets, he had 84 yards and a touchdown on 3 catches, but his volume is really not particularly high. He only had 43 targets last season and 26 receptions. So he needs to develop more route running skills to get himself open. He's obviously got speed, but until he gets more volume, I'm not really particularly high on him. And he's a guy that, if he slips, he's going to have a lot of high reward because of his talent potential, but he's also got some significant bust potential as well. I'm worried that a guy like him could turn into, not as bad as John Ross, but that same kind of situation where he's drafted because of his speed, but he never really is able to break out and take advantage of it. But guys like this could become Tyreek Hill. So there's all kinds of spectrums of what he could be, but at this point it's too much risk for me to consider taking him. A guy I like a lot more, who's actually listed as 4th on the depth chart, is Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow is more of that slot receiver that plays a similar game to a guy like Julian Edelman. He is a great option for the Raiders. He had some excellent games last season where you can just rely on him in PPR settings to give you a lot of catches and some decent value for you too. So he had 56 catches last year on 77 targets, which both of those were 3rd on the Raiders. And the guy who was 2nd, Nelson Aguilar, is now on the Patriots. So, and Nelson Aguilar was very much the same kind of guy. He's a slot receiver. He had 8 touchdowns last year, Nelson Aguilar did. So I expect some of those will go to Hunter Renfrow. And I would much rather have a guy like Hunter Renfrow than Henry Ruggs, because Ruggs has a little more hype value to him. People thinking he'll break out, but a lot of people sleep on people like Hunter Renfrow, who are just consistent guys that will give you a lot of receptions in PPR formats. I would much rather have Hunter Renfrow as a receiver that you can pick up in the middle to late rounds of the fantasy football draft and can give you some decent stream value from time to time. Other receivers, Bryan Edwards is a younger receiver that they're bringing up on their team, but he only had 11 receptions last year. He did have a touchdown, but again, if you need to have more production than that for me to really consider you seriously. So I'm not really looking at him, but he's a potential guy worth monitoring depending on how the rest of the receiving corps stands out. And then they also got John Brown, who had been on the Buffalo Bills, most notably in the past, for his success. John Brown has potential to be a consistent receiver for them. But the key with him is that he's an older guy. He's not necessarily got his best years ahead of him, for lack of better words. So John Brown, he's a guy that I talk about modest gains versus potential, and he is definitely at this point more of a modest gains guy. You know exactly what you're going to get. He's going to give you some modest production, probably at best, and it just simply, that's not going to win you fantasy football championships. So I say potential over modest production, because when you're in those later rounds of the draft, you want to get guys that'll give you some more potential to do better, like a Hunter Renfrow on that same team, than a guy like a John Brown, who is probably not going to really give you much more than, at best, 5 catches for 70 yards or something like that, and give you about 12 points. That doesn't win you fantasy football championships, but you do have potential with a guy who could develop into a slot consistent target for them, who gives you 6 catches a game, maybe 100 yards, maybe a touchdown. It's just better to go with guys like that can give you some more upside. Other players on their depth chart of note: Zay Jones has had some productivity in the past with Buffalo. He's not really developed any footing in Las Vegas yet. Willie Snead has been productive with the Ravens, but he's another older player that I think was really only a product of the fact that Lamar Jackson didn't have a lot of great receivers. So Willie Snead, another guy, is, you know what you're getting with him. He's not really giving you a lot of upside. So that being said, I'm not really interested in him. Tight ends. This is a real important position of note for the Raiders. So Darren Waller was the number 2 tight end last year. He was also a top 5 tight end in 2019, and he projects to be one of the better tight end options. So I am very interested in picking up Darren Waller. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes in draft boards, but I'm projecting probably about the 4th to 6th round. So that being said, he's a guy that I think you want to definitely consider taking in that realm, considering how the rest of the tight end landscape is. He gives you a lot of consistency, and he is their top receiving option on their team. You look at their stats from last year. Darren Waller had 145 targets. That's in the realm of Travis Kelce. 107 receptions. He had almost 1,200 yards for you, and 9 touchdowns. So this is excellent tight end value for a guy that's still not particularly well known. He was the top receiver by far for this team. The next guy in targets was Nelson Aguilar with 82. He's not on the team anymore. So Darren Waller, we talk about focal points of an offense, and this is a focal point of this offense that does not have anywhere near the hype of some of the other players that I talk about that are focal points of their offense. So because of that, this is a guy that you definitely want to try to target. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, but for tight ends, you don't really have a lot of options of great players if you're going to go with a consistent lock them in as a starter route. You've got guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle. Those are the top 2. Darren Waller probably 3. Mark Andrews probably 4. And then after that, you've got a lot of guys up in the air that could potentially get there, like Kyle Pitts is the popular one now. TJ Hawkinson is another guy I think who's got potential. Noah Fant, Hunter Henry with the Patriots, things like that. But it's a very short list of tight ends that you're probably going to be able to start. Otherwise, you're going to have to go the stream route week by week, which is stressful. So try to get Darren Waller if you can, is what I'm saying. And then an interesting handcuff potentially is Foster Moreau. He has had some decent games at times, but he's more of a red zone target at best because he only had 7 catches and 2 of them were touchdowns. So this is a guy that you're really only looking at in the event of an injury, and I'm not even really sure how much he would stand out if Darren Waller were to get hurt. But he does present some handcuff potential. The Raiders' defense, so they've drafted some players to try to improve their defense, most notably Trayvon Merrick at a TCU, but this defense was so bad last year, I would just not consider drafting them at all. Maybe they could improve, but I just don't see that happening. So, yeah. And then the Las Vegas Raiders kicker is Daniel Carlson. So Daniel Carlson is he's had some good games for them. He's also had some bad games. So generally, he's not really a kicker that I'm looking to draft. But a guy who's probably going to be available in that second to last, or excuse me, in that last round of the fantasy football draft where I say to take kickers. But it also, I'm not necessarily looking to draft him in that round, but also keep in mind that a lot of what makes kickers good in fantasy football is having an offense that is good enough to get you in the red zone, but not necessarily good enough to finish, and could result in a lot of field goals. And I could very easily see something like that happening with the Las Vegas Raiders because of, they don't necessarily have elite receiving options other than Darren Waller. They might try to stack the box against Josh Jacobs because they know they want him to get a touchdown, things like that. So there could be a lot of opportunities for a guy like Daniel Carlson to get some short field goals. This was the recipe for Younghoe Koo's success last year, which made him the best kicker in fantasy football. So what I'm getting at is that there's potential that Daniel Carlson could be a good kicker. But this is why you don't draft kickers anywhere higher than the last round of the draft, because you could get guys like him off waivers that could be good for you. So I'm not looking at Daniel Carlson as a draft pick, but maybe he's a guy that if I draft the kicker in the last round like I'm planning to, I can consider picking him up if he has good games. So that's my point there. But yeah, that's all I got today on the Las Vegas Raiders. Let me know if you're interested in more videos like these, and stay tuned for the Los Angeles teams. They're going to be coming up next. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.